The aim of this lecture is to provide you with some definitions and key elements that characterize startups. After this lecture, you will be aware about the internal factors that must be addressed to minimize the inner risk associated to any startup project. We say that innovation drives economic growth and enables our modern standard of living. However, we know more about the birth of galaxies than we know about the systemic process that creates companies like Google or Facebook. There is no doubt today about the fact that startups are the real innovation engine, but we tend to think that they are just smaller versions of established companies. As we are going to see later, this is not the case. Let's start with a couple of definitions. The first is by Eric Ries, the inventor of the Lean Startup movement. Ries says that a startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. The first definition focuses on two attributes: human institution and uncertainty. Human institutions means that team matters, and that's why, particularly at the very beginning of any project, when there are no numbers or market feedback, you have to evaluate if and how people are able to manage what is called the dead valley. Are they resilient? Do they have the inner motivation? Are they aware about what they are going to manage in the next couple of years? And then we have to consider the key characteristic of any startup project, the high level of uncertainty. And I'm referring to market and technology uncertainty. And this thing changes everything. The next definition I'm going to introduce is by Steve Blank, the developer of customer development method that launched the Lean Startup movement. He states that a startup is an organization formed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. This last definition includes two more elements: a verb that describes the dynamic process any startup must follow, the search of, and a noun, the second element, a business model. We are more familiar with business plan than to business model. When a startup is in the search mode, it doesn't yet have a business model. That is the story about how value is created, delivered, and captured. If you are an established corporate, you are exploiting your own business model. So, high level of uncertainty that can be summarized this way. We work with initiatives that have 10% data and 90% unknown. And that's why, as mentioned before, startups are not smaller version of established companies. And it's very common that you fall in love with technology and waste time, resources, money, and human capital. Do you know what is the main reason startups fail? No market need, which means you are devoting resources, building something nobody cares. It's very intuitive that you have to be aware about this menace as soon as possible. A startup team must combine ambition and determination with humility. So, a startup must focus on reducing the inner risk related to no market need, concentrating its efforts on the search of a business model, while at the same time coping with the technology risk. As Professor Chesberg says, bad things can happen to good technology, and much of what can happen is due to the business model the company uses to commercialize the technology. If you take a look at the equation describing the percentage chance of success, what you can get is it's really complicated to solve. There are several unknown quantities related to technology, products, customer, etc. If you work with startups, you have to know how to solve the equation, or at least you need to try to solve some unknown: team, business model identification on top of technology feasibility are the most critical ones. In the 20th century, the common way to product development was to build and ship products. Back then, an entrepreneur used a serial product development process that proceeded step by step with little, if any, customer feedback. Due to high level of uncertainty at the beginning, startups as just a set of hypotheses that have to be tested. The problem is that customers don't behave like your business plan. So we need to identify from the beginning what we call the leap of faith, the riskiest elements of the startup initial plan, the parts of the strategy that everything else depends on, and start validating them. If you are an entrepreneur, the first thing to do is focusing on the internal success and failures factors that are under the control of a startup founder. Second, you'll have to be ready and aware that you will change your plan along the way, getting to plan B or C.